So we had an act, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, back in 1990. And then there was a big revision of that act in 2008. And they're asking for really, I think, something which is as big as that. They're asking for it, but they're not part of government. It's for government to decide whether this is a sensible thing or not. So it won't necessarily happen just because they ask for it. But if it comes along, this will be a big thing. And what are they asking for? Unsurprisingly, more powers. So they're asking to be able to do more. They're asking for more discretion. They're asking for the ability sometimes not to have to do visits every 2 years to clinics, because they think that the clinics are basically okay, so that they can focus on the ones that are not okay. Well, but anyway, so they don't have to do things which are at the moment statutory. And also that they're asking that clinics don't have to be re-licensed every 5 years, but can be rolling. And sort of some changes of that kind. There are some changes also about information for donors. And this has come up in part because of these genetic tests that you can get through the posts these days. So that it's the business of people not telling their children that they have a biological father out there or a biological mother that they don't know about. That's becoming more difficult to leave until people are 18, when people are increasingly looking for tests through the post. So they want to have a look at that again. But the things which I'm most concerned about in relation to it is that yet again they're asking to extend what kind of experimentation they might do, and also to do it in a way which they call future proofing, which means asking for a blank check without having to go back and ask Parliament when the things actually happen. And so they say that in order to have future proofing, what you need is, and there's lots of words like flexible and sandbox, which is kind of experiment and that kind of thing. So, but essentially, either for some things, it would have to come back for regulation, and for other things that there would be discretion for the HFEA. So as much as possible discretion for HFEA, but if it's not that, at least allowing regulations in future, so you don't have to have a new law in future for things like genetic engineering of children, reproductive. So things which there are international moratoria on, and there's been a scandal in China about somebody doing this. Things which at the moment obviously dangerous and huge ethical implications. They want to say, oh, we obviously won't do it now, but we just want you to say, oh, in principle you can do it, and then when the time comes, then we'll do it, because then we'll know that things have moved on. So that's the kind of thing they mean by future proofing, and also getting rid of the 14-day rule. Of course, that is to say the rule that you can only experiment on embryos up to 14 days. It doesn't protect the embryo very much because it gets destroyed after 14 days, which is not very much protection, but it is a kind of limit. It sets a sort of limit, or at least that's how it's intended to be perceived. But it's a strange thing. It's a bit like, it's like setting a speed limit of 70 miles an hour in 1930, when no cars could reach that. And then when cars started to be able to reach that, saying, oh, no, we now need to extend, we now need to go for 100 miles an hour, because now cars can actually reach a higher speed. It was a stage of development which nobody could reach. Now the scientists think they can reach it, and so they're not even suggesting another limit, because if they did, it would be clear that it was as arbitrary as the first one. But there, I mean, I'll just read out this. This is the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. I'm quoting. The International Society for Stem Cell Research recently proposed guidelines to remove the 14-day limit on embryo research and replace this with strict case-by-case oversight for any research past 14 days where justified. So that means there is no limit up to birth, but it'll be case by case, but it's all right because it will be strict. because we have that nice little adjective there to settle us down, and that will be just as good as the 14-day rule. So that's again the kind of thing that they mean by future-proofing. It's not that they want to do that now or go very far now, but they want it in the future. So we will be putting out some guidance for people to engage. I would encourage people to engage, because I think it's frankly outrageous, but not unfortunately surprising, because we've been here before.
I think part of the difficulty was the way that the language was phrased of that consultation, because it was lulled people to this sense that it's all for patient benefit and it's all a natural extension of what was going to happen. And I think people have got to be careful about that kind of language. But there is also the opt-out, that if you've got embryos, you have to share embryos, you opt out of research rather than opt into research.
So again, there's another, so they want to extend, at the moment, you have to give consent for the embryo to be used for research, and it has to be specified what research it is. So you actually consent to something that you understand. Whereas they want a generic consent where you just hand it over because it might come in useful somehow for something that you have no idea what it might. And this is in the same consultation as that, also saying they want to do away with that research has to be necessary or desirable, because they say, well, sometimes you don't know if it's necessary or desirable, you just want to have a go. So we ought to allow that kind of research. So at the same time as they're weakening what's necessary for research, they also are weakening, or wants to weaken, the consent requirements.
And the whole thing is framed in terms of patient focused.
Yes, well, the first third or 2/3 of it are all about patients. The embryo stuff comes at the end. One thing which most people would overlook, but some people who are listening to this may be concerned about, they want to extend their powers, of course, but they're also interested in more things which are coming under fertility treatment than previously have been, that they should be regulated by the HFEA. So at the moment, for example, donor insemination is not licensed by the HFEA, wasn't part of the original law. And they want to extend to all kinds of fertility treatment, but this also means NAPRO. If what they say comes to pass, then all treatment which is addressing fertility, even if it doesn't involve any assisted reproductive technology, will come under the Human Fertilization Embryology Authority, because they will be the regulators for fertility, and they, who have extremely strong financial relations with the IVF industry, will be in charge of licensing or not licensing more natural alternatives to it, which I think is also something which would be very bad.
It's a fine example of slippery slope. Once you open the door, as in 1990, these sort of developments, changes they're inevitable.
It's not just a slippery slope, it's a slope which is, I hadn't realized there was so much further to go. I thought we were at the bottom already. and they keep extending the slope further.